5 years from now, you will arrive. The only question is, where? I want you to sit with that for a moment. Don't rush past it. Because many people hear a sentence like that, they nod their heads, and by the time they've walked to the refrigerator, it's gone. And 5 years passes. And they find themselves in the same chair, looking at the same ceiling, wondering why nothing has changed. And the answer, the honest, uncomfortable, liberating answer, is discipline. Or rather, the absence of it. Discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishment. I've said that for 40 years. I'll say it again today because it's as true today as the first time I encountered it, sitting in a small office in California, broke and embarrassed, listening to a man named Mr. Earl Schoaf explain to me why my life wasn't working. He didn't blame the economy. He didn't blame my upbringing. He didn't sympathize with my circumstances. He looked at me with those steady eyes and he said, "Jim, the problem isn't what's happening out there. The problem is what's happening in here." And he pointed at his own chest. That was a Tuesday afternoon in the late 1950s. I was 25 years old. I had pennies in my pocket and promises I couldn't keep. I had a young wife who believed in me more than I believed in myself. And I had a list of ambitions as long as my arm and a list of accomplishments that was nearly empty. For the first time in my adult life, someone had handed me the truth without wrapping it in comfort first. And it changed everything. Now here's what I found to be true about discipline and about the lack of it. We understand it in theory. We admire it in others. We plan to apply it starting Monday or the first of the month or January 1st. We are magnificent planners. We have journals full of goals and vision boards and lists of books we intend to read. But discipline doesn't live in the planning. Discipline lives in the doing. It lives in the early morning when the bed is warm and the alarm is unwelcome. It lives in the Tuesday afternoon when nothing is exciting and the work is simply work. It lives in the small, invisible, unremarkable moments that no one will ever applaud you for. That's where the extraordinary life is built. In those ordinary moments, one at a time. I grew up watching my father farm the land in rural Idaho. Now, my father was not a complicated man, but he was a wise one in the way that people who work with the earth become wise. He understood something that people who live in cities sometimes never quite grasp: the relationship between seasons and effort. You plant in spring, you tend through summer, you harvest in fall, and then comes winter, when the earth rests and you prepare for what comes next. There's a magnificent order to it, a rhythm. And my father never once stood at the edge of a field in June and complained that the corn wasn't ready yet. He knew better. He'd done his part. He trusted the process with the quiet confidence of a man who had watched the cycle complete itself dozens of times. Discipline is like that. You plant the seeds of daily action, and you tend them faithfully, and you do not demand the harvest before its time. The man who waters his seeds every day and then digs them up each evening to see how they're growing, that man will never have a garden. He doesn't trust the process. He needs evidence before the evidence is ready to come. And the soil simply doesn't negotiate on that point. Discipline requires what my father had: patience, consistency, and an absolute refusal to be deterred by invisible progress. Because here's the remarkable thing about progress. In the early stages, it is almost entirely invisible. You read for 30 minutes today, and you don't feel smarter. You exercise this morning, and you don't look different tonight. You save a few dollars this week, and you're not yet wealthy. You make the prospecting call, and nothing comes of it. And so the undisciplined person concludes, almost reasonably, that the actions aren't working. They stop. They try something else. They look for a faster path. And they spend a lifetime searching for shortcuts on a road that simply has none. The disciplined person knows something different. The disciplined person has learned, usually through painful trial, that the results are coming. They are as certain as the harvest. Not today, perhaps not this week, but they are coming. You reap what you sow, more than you sow, and later than you sow. Those three laws are as reliable as gravity, and they work whether you believe in them or not, whether you acknowledge them or not, whether you find them convenient or not. Let me tell you about a young man I spoke with many years ago after one of my seminars in Dallas, Texas. He came up to me afterward, still in his late 20s, sharp-eyed, eager, and he said, "Mr. Rohn, I've been coming to seminars like this for 2 years. I've taken notes. I have binders full of notes. I've listened to recordings. I've read the books you recommended, but nothing has changed." And I looked at him and I said, "Have you changed?" He paused, a long pause, and then he said, "I've been waiting for things to change." And there it was, right there in that sentence, the entire architecture of a life not yet lived. Things don't change, we change. And the mechanism of change, the engine, the instrument, the bridge, is discipline. So let's talk about what discipline actually is, because I think we've allowed the word to become synonymous with suffering. We picture discipline as deprivation, as white-knuckling through life, as denying ourselves all pleasure in service of some distant future reward. We picture the ascetic, the monk, the person living on rice and rising before dawn and flogging themselves into productivity. And that's not what I mean at all. Discipline, properly understood, is simply the decision to do what needs to be done, when it needs to be done, whether you feel like it or not. That's the whole definition. It doesn't have to be painful, it just has to be consistent. And consistent is the operative word, because discipline applied once or twice is not discipline, it's an attempt. Discipline is the daily practice, the repetition, the unremarkable, faithful, continuing execution of a plan. Some people wait until they feel inspired to act. They wait for the mood to strike, for the conditions to be perfect, for the stars to align. They wait for Wednesday, when maybe they'll have more energy. They wait for spring, when maybe they'll feel more motivated. They wait for the children to be grown, for the mortgage to be smaller, for the job to be less demanding. And while they wait, the weeks become months, and the months become years. And one day they look up and realize they've been waiting their entire adult life. But the few who build extraordinary lives, and I've met them, I've studied them. I've been privileged to sit at their tables and hear their stories. They don't wait for inspiration. They act, and inspiration follows. They don't wait for motivation. They build the discipline, and motivation becomes a byproduct of action rather than a precondition for it. They understand that feelings are passengers in the car, not the driver. The driver is commitment. The driver is the decision made in advance that this is what I do, regardless of how I feel about it today. Now, I want to go deeper than theory. Let me give you something specific. Let me talk about what the daily disciplines actually look like. And I'll go through several of the most important ones, because this conversation would be incomplete if we stayed in the comfortable abstract and never touched the practical. The first discipline, and I'd argue the most foundational one, the one that all the others rest upon, is the discipline of your mind. What you allow in, what you dwell on, what you rehearse in the theater of your own thoughts. Mr. Schoaf said something to me in that first meeting that I've carried for over 60 years. He said, "Jim, what you think about when you don't have to think about anything, that's the autobiography of your future." Think about that. When you're driving alone on a long road, when you're in the shower, when you're lying in bed at night in that quiet space before sleep arrives, where does your mind go? For most people, it rehearses the same anxieties, the same grievances, the same old conversations, the same familiar fears. It revisits the slight from last Tuesday. It anticipates the failure of next month's plan. It rehearses inadequacy with remarkable consistency and commitment. And they wonder why their life feels like it's circling the same territory. They're rehearsing it daily. With tremendous discipline, actually, just directed toward the wrong content. Discipline of mind doesn't mean forcing yourself to think positive thoughts by sheer willpower while suppressing everything difficult. It means making a conscious, sustained choice about what you feed your mind. Books, recorded wisdom, the company of people who challenge and elevate your thinking. Time set aside daily for reflection, for sitting quietly and asking yourself with genuine honesty, what am I doing? Where am I going? Is today's activity consistent with the future I say I want? Am I who I intend to become, or am I becoming someone by default? My father used to say, and this was a farmer's observation, simple and entirely direct, "Boy, you'll grow what you plant, but whatever you don't plant, the weeds will take care of." He was talking about fields, but it applies to a mind with perfect precision. Leave your mind untended, and the weeds of worry and doubt and distraction and small thinking will grow on their own. They require no effort. They require no planting. They arrive uninvited and spread with remarkable efficiency. Every garden proves this. Every mind proves this. The discipline is to plant something intentional every single day, not when you feel like it. Every day. And I mean every day the way a farmer means every day. Because a farmer who skips watering in August because it's hot and inconvenient doesn't get a modified harvest. He gets no harvest. I remember sitting in a hotel room in Chicago. It was late January, one of those iron gray winter nights where the cold comes through the glass and the city looks muffled and blue. And I was supposed to read for an hour before bed, as I'd committed to doing for many years. I was tired. I'd spoken 3 times that day, across 2 cities. I had every reasonable excuse that a reasonable man could construct. And I remember sitting on the edge of that bed, looking at the book on the nightstand, thinking about my father, who got up at 4:30 in the morning, not when the weather was pleasant, but every morning, season after season. And I picked up the book. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No one filmed it. No one knew. No one applauded. But it was one of thousands of moments just like it, woven together over years, that determined the kind of person I became. Discipline isn't the grand gesture. Discipline is the small choice, repeated so many times that it stops being a choice and becomes part of who you are. Now, there's a question worth asking here. Why is discipline so difficult? If it's simply a choice, repeated, if it's this straightforward, why don't more people practice it? Why isn't discipline the norm rather than the exception? Here's what I've come to believe, after decades of studying the people who do and the many more who don't. The problem isn't laziness. I genuinely don't believe most people are lazy. I've met very few genuinely lazy people in my life. What I've met are people who are busy in the wrong direction. People who are working hard at the wrong things. People who have never sat down and made a clear, honest accounting of their daily activity and asked, does this activity, this exact mix of how I spend my hours, compounded over 5 years, lead to the life I say I want? Or am I just moving? Most people are moving. Busy people are not necessarily purposeful people. Activity is not the same as progress. And the hardest thing I've ever had to say to a hardworking person is, you are working very hard at not getting where you want to go. But the deeper answer, and this is the one that matters most, is that the problem is philosophy. Your philosophy determines your approach to life. And most people's philosophy has never been examined. It was received, not chosen. It arrived through television and habit and the attitudes of the people in your neighborhood and the things you overheard at the dinner table when you were 9 years old. And if that philosophy says, even quietly, even below the level of articulation, the world is unfair, effort may not pay off, and comfort today is worth sacrificing tomorrow for, then of course discipline is difficult. You're fighting your own operating system every time you try to do the disciplined thing. The work of changing your life is first the work of changing your philosophy. And changing your philosophy requires the sustained, daily discipline of exposing yourself to better thinking, books, mentors, ideas that challenge what you've always assumed. This is why I've said for 40 years, formal education will make you a living. Self-education will make you a fortune. Not because degrees are without value, but because the person who commits to educating themselves beyond what they're required to learn, beyond the curriculum, beyond the credential, out of genuine hunger for understanding, that person changes their philosophy. And changing your philosophy changes everything downstream from it. Let me ask you something. How many books have you read in the last 90 days? Not glanced at, not half finished with good intentions, not started in January and abandoned by February. Read, completed, put on a shelf with your mind genuinely different for having gone through the experience. For most people, the honest answer is close to 0. And I'm not saying that to shame anyone. I'm saying it with the urgency I felt when Mr. Schoaf said it to me, looking at my sheepish face in that small office. Because a library, a personal library, built carefully over years, is the single most powerful self-improvement tool available to any human being, at minimal cost. Every great mind that ever lived has left their best thinking in print. Aristotle is waiting. Lincoln is waiting. Marcus Aurelius is waiting. Darwin is waiting. Carnegie and Rockefeller left their wisdom. The collected intelligence of thousands of years of human civilization, organized and indexed and available, sits on shelves in libraries and bookstores and on screens in your pocket. And most people walk past that treasure every day on the way to entertainment. Miss a meal? Don't miss your reading. I've said that for years, and I mean it literally. Not because reading is more important than sustenance for your body, but because it is that important for your mind. And in a culture that treats intellectual development as something you stop doing when you graduate, that treats adult learning as optional, as extra credit, as something remarkable rather than something basic, someone needs to say clearly, it is not optional. It is the fundamental investment. It is how you upgrade the philosophy that determines everything. The second great discipline, and the one that perhaps has the most direct and measurable impact on your outer results, is the discipline of your time. Now, I need to say something important about time before we go further, because I think we have some confused ideas about it. Time is the great equalizer. I've never met a rich man who had more hours in his day than a poor one. Every human being on this earth receives 24 hours with each rotation of the planet. The president receives 24 hours. The Nobel laureate receives 24 hours. The billionaire and the person struggling to pay the rent both receive the same 24 hours. The difference, and it is a profound, life-defining difference, is what each person does with those hours, what they choose, what they prioritize, what they sacrifice, and what they protect. I remember asking a very successful man once, a man who had built a business from nothing to something remarkable, who had raised children he was proud of, who seemed to live a life of both productivity and genuine enjoyment. I said, "How do you do it all? How do you accomplish so much while still seeming present in your life?" And he looked at me with a kind of gentle puzzlement, as if the question were slightly strange, and he said, "I just never let an hour go wasted." Simple, not mysterious, not the product of some rare gift he'd been born with. Just discipline, applied consistently to the clock. Here's what I've observed about time and the undisciplined life. The hours go. They always go. Whether you use them or not, Wednesday becomes Thursday. January becomes December. Your 40s arrive while you were still finishing something you meant to do in your 30s. Time has an indifference to your readiness, your mood, your good intentions. The unplanted field looks exactly the same at harvest time as a field that was never intended to be planted. The seasons keep arriving. The question is whether you are doing something in each one. And so the discipline of time is this: decide, in advance, what your hours are worth. Decide what activities deserve your hours and which do not. Make a plan for each day. Not a plan so rigid that it crushes the spontaneous joys of living, but a plan clear enough that at the end of the day, you can look back and say honestly, I moved toward the life I want today. I planted seeds. Now, I want to name the enemies of time because I think it's important to see them clearly. You cannot discipline an area of life whose problems you haven't clearly identified. The first enemy is what I call the urgency trap. These are the things that feel urgent but are not important in any long-term sense. The phone that needs answering, the meeting that needed attending, the small crisis that consumed the morning. We move from one urgency to the next, all day, feeling productive, feeling busy, arriving at the end of the week exhausted, and finding, if we're honest, that not a single hour was spent on the things that actually matter for the long term. The urgent consumed the important, the reading, the skill development, the strategic thinking, the relationship investment, the reflection was deferred. Again, it's always tomorrow, and tomorrow is the most dangerous word in the language of ambition. The second enemy is distraction. And this one has grown more powerful in recent decades than at any previous point in human history. The devices in our pockets are engineered, I mean this quite precisely, engineered by brilliant people whose explicit goal is to capture and hold your attention. Every notification, every scroll, every brief dopamine hit is part of a system designed to transform your hours into their revenue. And it works. It works magnificently. I'm not preaching against technology. I'm saying that the undisciplined relationship with technology is one of the most costly things in the lives of ambitious people today. Hours that could have been invested in development are consumed in consumption, and the two are not the same. The third enemy of time is other people's agendas. Here's the thing about the undisciplined person. Their schedule is largely written by others, by whoever called last, whoever asked most urgently, whoever needed something. And they end the day feeling responsible and responsive and slightly resentful, having spent their hours serving everyone's priorities but their own. Discipline of time means protecting your high-value hours, the hours when your mind is sharpest, when your creativity is fullest, and investing those hours in your own development and your most important work before the urgencies of the day arrive. I used to teach this simply. Own your first hour. Whatever else the day demands, before you open the inbox, before you answer the messages, before you allow the world to set your agenda, give the first hour to yourself, to your reading, to your planning, to the work that matters most. That one practice, maintained faithfully, is worth more than most productivity systems combined. Now let's turn to the third discipline. the discipline of health. And I want to address it at a philosophical level rather than a prescriptive one. Your body is the vehicle for everything you intend to accomplish in this life. Every idea you've ever had traveled through your body before it reached the world. Every relationship you've built required your physical presence. Every book you've read, every business you've built, every child you've raised, your body was the instrument of all of it. And yet most people treat their body with considerably less care than they treat their automobile. Think about that for a moment. An automobile, which can be replaced. A body, which cannot. People will change the oil on schedule, rotate the tires, respond immediately to a warning light, bring the vehicle in for regular maintenance. And meanwhile, they run their bodies on too little sleep, too much poor food, no movement, chronic stress, and the accumulated debt of years of neglect. And they wonder why the engine feels sluggish. I remember a man who came to me once, a successful businessman, sharp and driven and proud of his intensity. He told me he hadn't taken a real day off in 3 years. No vacation, no genuine rest, no attention to sleep or nutrition or exercise. He was proud of this, almost boastful. And I said to him, "What happens to a car that's never maintained?" He said, "It breaks down." I said, "And does it give you a lot of warning?" He was quiet for a moment, and then he said, "Not always." I said, "Your body is not different." Discipline of health means understanding that you are playing a long game. This is not about vanity or appearance, though there is nothing wrong with wanting to look well. It's about longevity. It's about showing up for the harvest you've worked to plant, not collapsing in the field in year 15 because you never tended the vehicle that was doing the planting. The most successful life is a long life, and a long life requires investment in the body that carries it. Sleep is a discipline. I've met people who boast about sleeping 4 or 5 hours, as though deprivation were a mark of seriousness and commitment. But a mind running on insufficient sleep is not performing at its best, and you wouldn't fully know it because you've never experienced what your best actually looks and feels like, fully rested. A tired mind makes smaller decisions. A tired mind settles for good enough because it doesn't have the reserves to reach for better. A tired mind is more emotionally reactive, less patient, less creative, less strategic. Sleep is not indulgence. Sleep is maintenance of the instrument. Exercise is a discipline. Movement is one of the most powerful tools available to us for mental clarity, emotional resilience, and sustained energy. The ancient Greeks understood this in a way that we've forgotten and that we're only now beginning to rediscover through neuroscience. They didn't separate the development of the mind from the development of the body. They trained both with equal seriousness, in the understanding that they were not separate entities, but aspects of a single instrument. What you do to your body, you do to your thinking. What you build in the body, you build in the mind. And food is a discipline, not as a list of rules and prohibitions, but as a philosophy. Your body is the product of what you consistently consume. Your mind is also the product of what you consistently consume. The parallel is not accidental. It is the same law applied in 2 different domains. Put in poor fuel, and the engine runs poorly. Put in good fuel, and the engine runs well. This is not complex. It is the same farming logic my father understood. You grow what you plant. You become what you consistently put in. The discipline of health, taken seriously and practiced faithfully, is an act of deep respect. Respect for your potential. Respect for the future you say you want to build. Respect for the people who depend on you to be present, clear-headed, and capable. Not just today, but for years and decades to come. Now let's talk about a discipline that is perhaps the most discussed, and in my experience, the most poorly executed. The discipline of financial choices. I was 25 years old and broke. I want you to understand what I mean by that. I don't mean struggling through a difficult patch. I mean that after 5 years of working, genuinely working, showing up, putting in the hours, I had built nothing. Not a thin savings account, not a small investment, nothing. I had an income and I had expenses, and the expenses always seemed to find the income with an efficiency that would have been impressive had it not been so destructive. And when Mr. Schoaf asked me to describe my financial plan, I had to admit that I didn't have one. I had a hope. I was hoping things would improve. I was hoping that somehow, without any specific mechanism, the gap between where I was and where I wanted to be would close on its own. And Mr. Schoaf was quiet for a long moment. in the way a doctor is quiet when he sees something on an X-ray and takes a breath before he speaks. And then he said very gently, "Jim, hope is a wonderful thing, but it is not a strategy. Hope will not set the sail."
The sail.
That metaphor has stayed with me longer than any other. It's not the blowing of the wind that determines your destination. It is the set of the sail. The same wind blows on all of us. The same economic headwinds and tailwinds, the same marketplace forces, the same tax codes and interest rates and employment conditions. And some people, when that wind blows, are wrecked, and others use it to sail to extraordinary places. And the difference has nothing to do with the wind. It has everything to do with the sail, with the preparation, the adjustment, the disciplined response to conditions you didn't choose. Now, financial discipline is not complex. This is important to say because many people have been convinced, partly by an industry that profits from their confusion, that personal finance is enormously technical and requires expert guidance for even basic decisions. And while there is certainly a place for good counsel, the foundational principles are simple and have not changed. Spend less than you earn. Save and invest the difference faithfully. Build multiple sources of income. Give generously. These are not new ideas. They are old ideas. They appear in every culture, every tradition, every historical period that produced lasting prosperity. They are as reliable as the laws of the harvest. And they are exactly as difficult to follow as you allow them to be. The challenge is not intellectual. The challenge is philosophical and behavioral. It requires the discipline of delayed gratification, the ability to say no to the visible, present, tangible pleasure in service of the invisible, future reward. And we live in a culture that is masterfully, systematically opposed to delayed gratification. Every advertisement is designed to collapse the distance between want and acquisition. Credit has made things you cannot afford available immediately. The message from every direction is, have it now, pay for it later, you deserve it immediately. And the discipline, the countercultural act of financial discipline, is to resist that with a philosophy that says, I will own what I can afford. I will build before I buy. I will earn before I spend. And I will set aside something from every income, not when I can afford to, but as a non-negotiable act of respect for my own future. Profits are better than wages. I've said that for decades, and I want to explain what I mean because it's sometimes misunderstood. I'm not saying wages are without value. Wages are how most people begin. Wages are appropriate and respectable. But wages, by definition, pay you only for the hours you work. And there are only so many hours. If your entire economic life is a straight trade of time for money, you are fundamentally limited by the amount of time you have. The way to break that limitation is to build something, a skill that commands a premium, a small business, an investment that earns while you sleep, something that generates a return independent of your direct, continuous labor. That is profit. And profit, reinvested and compounded, is how ordinary people build extraordinary futures. Not luck, not inheritance. Compound growth on consistent investment, made possible by the daily discipline of spending less than you earn. I remember once meeting a school teacher, a woman who had taught for 37 years, who had never earned a large income, who had driven the same used car for a decade, who ate her lunch from home every day, who had the modest and careful habits of someone who had always been thoughtful about money. And when she retired, she had more in savings than most of her colleagues who had earned considerably more. Not because she was lucky, not because she had some special knowledge, because she had every month for 37 years set aside something first and spent the rest. It was that simple and that uncommon. Discipline, applied to money over time. The harvest is always proportional to the planting. The fifth discipline I want to explore with you is the discipline of relationships, and particularly how you invest in them. Now, you might think of relationships as the opposite of discipline: spontaneous, emotional, organic, resistant to structure. And there's truth in that. The best moments in relationship are unplanned. But what I've observed is this: the people who have the most meaningful, sustaining, productive relationships are not people who stumbled into them by accident. They are people who invested in them consistently, who showed up faithfully, who tended the garden rather than waiting for the weeds to choke it before they noticed. In personal relationships, marriage, family, deep friendship, the primary discipline is presence. Not just physical presence, but genuine mental and emotional presence. I've known men who were at the dinner table every evening and absent for every real conversation. Their bodies showed up. Their attention was at the office, in the worry, in the distraction of a mind that could not stop running. And their children grew up, and their marriages grew cold. And one day they looked up to find themselves surrounded by people they barely knew, though they had lived together for years, sometimes decades. Presence is a discipline, and in a world that competes ferociously for your attention, the devices, the notifications, the endless urgency of a connected life, choosing to be fully present with another human being is one of the most loving and increasingly countercultural acts available to you. To put the phone in another room, to look someone in the eyes, to be in the conversation rather than managing it from behind a glass. That is discipline applied to love. In professional relationships, the discipline is generosity. And here's what I've found without exception across 40 years of observation. The most successful people I have ever known were the most generous. Not generous once they could afford to be, generous before they could afford to be, generous with their time, their knowledge, their connections, their attention, their encouragement. They understood something that the purely transactional mind never grasps, that generosity compounds, that what you give out, given freely, without expectation of specific return, comes back in ways you cannot predict, from directions you cannot anticipate, through channels you didn't know existed. The universe's accounting is invisible, but reliable. What you plant, in seeds of service, in seeds of genuine helpfulness, grows and returns to you multiplied. Some people keep a careful, invisible ledger of every favor given and received. They are efficient. They are measured. They do not give more than they expect to receive. They are reasonable in their generosity. And they live in a small world, because a world organized entirely around careful transaction is a world without the expansiveness that comes from genuine gift. The sixth discipline, and this one weaves through all the others like a thread that, if pulled, would unravel the whole fabric, is the discipline of response. How you meet adversity. Let me be clear about something. Life will not cooperate with your timeline. Plans will fail. The harvest you projected in autumn will not come. The business you believed in will not perform as you designed. The person you trusted will disappoint you. The economy will turn in the wrong direction. The health will falter. The relationship you didn't tend will crack. The winter will be longer than you thought you could endure. This is not pessimism. My father never pessimistically doubted the harvest, but he also never planted in the expectation of a perfect season. He knew that weather is uncertain, that pests arrive, that some years are hard, that the farmer's life includes real difficulty in every decade, and he built his life accordingly, with reserves for winter, with humility before what he couldn't control, and with an absolute commitment to show up and do the work regardless of what the weather was doing. The discipline of response is recognizing that you cannot control everything that happens to you, but you can absolutely control how you respond to it. Between what happens and how you respond, there is a space. It may be a fraction of a second in a moment of crisis, or it may be a long, reflective season after a significant loss, but the space exists, and in that space is your freedom, your ability to choose the response, and in that choice is your growth, and eventually, your happiness. Some people, when things go wrong, go inward and dark. They brood, they blame. They rehearse the injury with the same faithfulness they never applied to their disciplines. They construct elaborate explanations of why the world is unfair and why their particular circumstances are uniquely difficult. And they bring those explanations to every subsequent experience as a filter through which nothing good can pass. But the few who build extraordinary lives in the wake of failure, and I've met them, men and women who lost businesses and rebuilt, who suffered loss and found meaning, who were broken by life and became deeper for it, those people all share one quality. They returned, with discipline, to a single productive question. What do I do next? Not why did this happen? Not who is to blame? Not what does this say about the fundamental unfairness of life? Those questions lead nowhere productive. They may feel satisfying in the short term, but they are traps. The question that leads forward is always, what do I do next? That is the set of the sail. The wind is what it is. Your response is entirely yours. Now, I want to speak for a moment about the seasonal nature of this whole conversation, because I think it adds a dimension that practical advice often misses. Life comes in seasons. This is not metaphor. Or rather, it is metaphor in the same way that all the deepest truths are delivered in metaphor, because the visible world is teaching us the invisible one. Spring is for planting, the fresh start, the new resolve, the excited discipline of someone launching into something new. Summer is for tending, the consistent, unglamorous, unrewarded work of a plan in motion, when the results aren't visible yet and the excitement of spring has faded and the harvest of fall hasn't arrived. Fall is for harvesting, the reward, the result, the visible evidence that the disciplines produced what you hoped. And winter is for reflection, for honest accounting of what the year held, what worked and what didn't, what needs to change and what needs to be protected as you prepare for spring again. Many people spend their lives trying to live only in spring and fall. They love the excitement of new beginnings, and they want the reward of outcomes. They want to skip summer, the tending, the unglamorous showing up, the faithful execution of plan after plan when the soil is dry and nothing visible is changing. And they absolutely want to skip winter. They don't want to sit in the cold and reflect honestly on what went wrong and what needs to change. Winter feels like failure. It feels like pause. And they fill it with distraction rather than reflection. And they arrive at the next spring with none of winter's lessons.
But you can't skip winter. The seasons don't negotiate. They don't arrive when you're ready. They arrive according to their own schedule, with or without your participation. The discipline is to meet each season fully, to plant in spring with full commitment, to tend through summer without losing faith, to harvest in fall with gratitude rather than surprise, and to reflect in winter with the courage to be honest. I've watched people spend 3 years in the summer of a project and grow so discouraged by invisible progress that they abandoned it 3 months before the harvest. 3 years of seeds, 3 years of watering, 3 years of faithful discipline, and then they walked away from the field in August, unable to endure the summer 1 season longer. And they never saw what fall would have brought. Discipline requires the faith of a farmer, not blind faith, not faith that ignores reality, but the informed, earned faith of someone who has watched the seasons complete themselves before and trusts the process because they understand it, not merely because they hope it will be true. And now let me turn to what I think is the most important thing I'll say in this entire conversation, and it's about you specifically. Not about principles in the abstract, but about the person listening. I want to talk about self-trust. Everything I've described, the discipline of mind, of time, of health, of money, of relationships, of response. All of it rests on a foundation that most conversations about discipline never mention. The foundation is your relationship with yourself, whether you trust yourself, whether when you say, "I will do this," you do it. Here's the remarkable thing about discipline that no one tells you. It's not primarily about accomplishing goals. It is about building a relationship with yourself. It is about becoming the kind of person whose word, even to themselves, means something. Every time you say, "I will do this," and then you do it, you make a deposit into the account of self-trust. And every time you say, "I will do this," and then the mood changes, the circumstances aren't perfect, the excuse presents itself, and you don't do it, you make a withdrawal. And most people, if they were honest about their accounting, are significantly overdrawn. They don't trust themselves. They make plans they don't keep. They set goals they abandon. They tell themselves stories about why the exception was reasonable this time. And the cumulative effect of all those exceptions is a deep, quiet, rarely spoken conviction. I can't trust myself to do what I say. And from that conviction, from that fundamental uncertainty about one's own reliability, it becomes nearly impossible to build anything lasting. The work of rebuilding self-discipline begins not with a grand plan, but with a small, specific, unbreakable promise. Not, "I will transform my life by next quarter." Just, "I will read for 20 minutes tonight," and I will, and then you do it. And tomorrow, "I will walk for 30 minutes this morning," and I will, and you do. And the week after, "I will set aside this amount every month starting now," and I will, and you do. Small promises, kept, absolutely. And gradually, the account fills. And gradually, the bigger promises become possible. Not because you've changed your strategy, because you've changed your relationship with yourself. Because you've proved to yourself, through evidence, through repeated action, that you are the kind of person who does what they say. This is deeper than any technique. This is character. And character is not something you're born with, except as a seed. Character is something you cultivate daily, through the choices you make in the moments
moments no one is watching, through the discipline that is invisible and personal and entirely yours. I want to say something now to the person who feels they've wasted time, who is looking back across years that didn't go the way they hoped, who is measuring the distance between where they are and where they imagined being by now and finding that distance discouraging. You have not run out of time. I have met men and women who began their real financial life in their 50s and built something admirable by their 70s. I have met people who changed their health at 60 and had their best decade at 65. I have met people who rebuilt their businesses after devastating failure, who repaired relationships they thought were irrevocably broken, who found their calling at an age when they'd nearly given up on the question. The timeline is not as fixed as fear tells us. What's fixed is the day you decide to begin, not the day you consider beginning, or the day you plan to begin, or the day you start getting ready to begin. The day you begin. That day, if it is today, unlocks what follows. And what follows is determined by the faithfulness of the disciplines you apply going forward from this moment. The seeds are still available. The soil is still receptive. The seasons will come in their faithful order. All that's required is that you begin today with the disciplines that bridge the gap between who you are and who you intend to become. Here's what I know with absolute conviction after a long life of study and observation. The gap between where you are and where you want to be is not a talent gap. It is not an intelligence gap. It is not fundamentally a circumstances gap. Those circumstances certainly play a role, and some people face headwinds that others do not. The real gap, the gap over which you have complete jurisdiction, is a disciplines gap. It's the space between what you know and what you do. And you know. You already know. You know you should be reading more than you're reading. You know you should be saving more than you're saving. You know the habits around sleep and food and movement that would serve you. You know which relationships in your life are pulling you down and which are pulling you up. You know the response patterns that are costing you, the blame, the procrastination, the comfortable excuse. You know all of this. And the knowledge by itself is worth almost nothing. I don't say that to be harsh. I say it because it's liberating, because it means the gap is not in your understanding. It's in your doing. And doing is something you can choose right now, today. Some people will come to the end of this conversation and feel inspired for a few hours. They'll think about changing. They'll feel the energy of possibility. And by Thursday, they'll be back to exactly where they were. And in 5 years, nothing will have changed. And they'll wonder why. And the answer will be the same answer it has always been. But the few, and there are always the few in every audience, in every generation, the few who hear something here that catches and lands in a specific place, who feel not just inspiration, but recognition, those few will do one thing differently today. Not overhaul their entire life. One thing. Read for 20 minutes. Write down 3 honest goals. Set aside the first 10% before they spend $1. Go to bed an hour earlier. Call the mentor they've been meaning to call. Make one specific promise to themselves about one specific discipline and keep it. That one thing, maintained, becomes 2 things. 2 things become a routine. A routine, sustained, becomes a discipline. A discipline, practiced over years, becomes character. And character, as the philosophers have always said, is destiny. The bridge between your goals and your accomplishment is built one plank at a time. Not in a dramatic weekend of transformation, not in a 10-day challenge or a 30-day reset. One plank, each day, placed faithfully, whether or not anyone is watching, whether or not the results are yet visible, whether or not you feel like it today. My father finished every planting season the same way. He'd walk the length of the field at dusk, when the light was going gold and the work was done, and he'd run his hands through the turned earth, slowly, the way you touch something you've worked hard for. And he'd be quiet for a long while. And then he'd say, "Good work today." Not remarkable, not heroic, not extraordinary. Good work, faithful work, enough. That's what discipline looks like from the inside. Not dramatic, not glamorous, just good work. And tomorrow, good work again. And the day after, the same. Compounded over months and years and decades until the man who said, good work today, in an empty field, has built something that no one with a different philosophy could fully explain. 5 years from now, you will arrive somewhere. The seasons will have passed. The weeks will have become months, and the months years. And what you did in those years will be what you are then. There is no other accounting. The harvest is exactly what the planting was. The life you have in 5 years is the life your daily disciplines are building today. The seeds are in your hands right now. Not tomorrow's seeds, today's seeds. This moment's choice of where to put your time, your energy, your attention, your effort. What you do with those seeds, what you plant, how faithfully you tend, how long you are willing to wait, that is entirely up to you. The field is waiting. The seasons don't pause. Begin. Let me go back because I don't think I've said enough about the first discipline, the discipline of mind. I want to stay here a while longer because I believe it is the root from which everything else grows, and if you don't get the root right, you'll keep fighting the same battles in every other area for the rest of your life. Here's the thing about your mind that took me a long time to fully appreciate. The mind is a garden, I mentioned that earlier, and like a garden, it will grow whatever is planted in it with remarkable fidelity. It does not distinguish between seeds you planted on purpose and seeds that blew in on the wind. It does not grade inputs by quality, it grows what's there, it fertilizes what it's given, and then, with consistent watering, it produces those things in abundance. Now, most people treat the garden of their mind like an unattended lot in a city. Things grow in it, all kinds of things, without any particular plan or intention. The weeds of doubt, the brambles of other people's low expectations, the hard-packed earth of habitual thinking that was never truly examined. And from that untended lot, they expect to produce a harvest of extraordinary results. It doesn't work that way. It has never worked that way. The farmer who wants wheat must plant wheat. The person who wants discipline, courage, clarity, and growing capability must plant those things deliberately, daily, in the specific soil of the mind. The way you plant in the mind is through what I've always called input discipline. What you read, what you listen to, what you watch, what you discuss, and most importantly, what you think about voluntarily when nothing external is demanding your attention. I want to talk specifically about books, because I feel strongly about this and I don't think I can overstate it. Mr. Schoaf asked me in our first real conversation, Jim, how many books have you read this year? And I said, embarrassed, that I hadn't read any. Not one book in a full year of wanting to be successful. He didn't scold me. He said quietly, a man who won't read has no advantage over a man who can't read. And I felt that deeply, because I could read. I had the ability and I had chosen to do nothing with it. Every book you read is a conversation with someone who spent years, sometimes a lifetime, distilling their best thinking on a specific subject. For a few dollars and a few hours of your time, you can sit with the best thinking of the most disciplined financial minds who ever lived. You can walk through the philosophy of men who built great enterprises. You can understand health, relationships, psychology, business, history from the people who understood these things most deeply. There is no other investment with that ratio of cost to return. None. I used to challenge the people in my seminars with this. If you read one book per month for the next 5 years, you will have read 60 books. Do you understand what 60 carefully chosen books on your craft, on your mind, on your character, on the lives of people who built something real? Do you understand what 60 such books would do to your thinking, to your vocabulary, to your philosophy, to the range of solutions you bring to problems? In most industries, the person who has read 60 focused books is among the most informed practitioners in the field, because almost no one does it. Almost no one commits to that simple, inexpensive, entirely available practice and maintains it faithfully. And the few who do stand apart, not because the books contain magic, because the consistent practice of reading changes the thinker. It builds new pathways in the mind. It expands the available range of responses to any situation. It populates the mind with examples, with metaphors, with the hard-won wisdom of people who faced difficulties similar to yours and found their way through. Miss a meal, don't miss your reading. I mean it. Now, alongside the discipline of reading, there is the discipline of association, the people around you. And I want to spend more time here because I believe it is the most underappreciated discipline in the whole field of personal development.
The people you spend your time with will, over the years, shape your philosophy more powerfully than almost anything else.
More than most books in many cases. Because the people around you don't just share ideas, they model behavior. They establish the invisible norms of what is acceptable, what is expected, what is considered reasonable. They create the social weather that you live inside every day. If you are surrounded by people who consider it normal to work hard, read widely, think carefully, save consistently, and invest for the future, those things feel like the baseline. You don't have to fight for them. They are simply what people do, and you are pulled toward them naturally.
If you are surrounded by people who consider those same behaviors excessive, tedious, or presumptuous, who would rather discuss yesterday's entertainment than tomorrow's plans, you are swimming upstream every day. Not because they're bad people, but because association is not a neutral force. It has direction and it has velocity. Mr. Schoff's observation was not a soft suggestion. It is a description of a real mechanism. We are profoundly social creatures. We take our cues from each other about what is valued, what is possible, what is worth aspiring to. The researchers who study social networks have found that habits, attitudes, and even health behaviors spread through social circles with the same patterns as contagion. Your associations are not decoration. They are environment. And environment shapes what grows. This is not an invitation to abandon the people you love or to become cold toward those whose pace differs from yours. Family is family. Long friendship is precious. But it is an honest examination of where you choose to invest your discretionary hours. Who do you seek out? Who do you call when you're thinking through something important? And what is the net effect of those associations on your philosophy, your habits, your daily expectations of yourself? Seek out people who are ahead of you in the areas that matter to you, not to flatter them, but to be shaped by the example they represent, and in turn, become the person who elevates those around you, because you are, whether you know it or not, a source of influence on everyone in your circle. The question is not whether you're influencing them. The question is which direction you're pulling. Now, I want to develop one more dimension of the financial discipline, because I said something earlier that I want to expand. I said that profits are better than wages. Let me explain that more fully. The person whose entire income is a single salary is in a structurally fragile position. Not because salaries are wrong or insufficient. They are neither necessarily. But because any income stream that depends entirely on your continuing, personal, direct labor is limited by the number of hours you can provide and vulnerable to any disruption in your ability to provide them. Illness, economic change, a shift in the marketplace, a company that no longer needs what you specifically offer. Any of these can interrupt the single-stream life. The discipline of building additional income streams, modest at first, growing over time, is not just a financial strategy. It is a philosophy of resilience and independence. It says, I will not leave my economic future to a single point of failure. I will build, over time, multiple sources of value for the marketplace, and I will let those streams together carry more water than any single channel can. Now, I want to be clear about what I mean and don't mean by this. I'm not suggesting that everyone should immediately start a business or quit their job or make dramatic financial moves. What I'm suggesting is the philosophy, the long-term orientation toward building assets, whether those assets are financial investments, developed skills, created content, improved properties, or business systems. And the key word is building. The discipline of building something incrementally over time from whatever foundation you currently have. The person who earns a salary and saves a portion and invests that portion consistently over 20 years is building. The person who develops a marketable skill and finds ways to apply it beyond their primary employment is building. The person who reads and grows and becomes more valuable to the marketplace over time, rather than simply doing the same thing they did last year at the same level for a slightly higher wage, that person is building. And what they're building is options. The most valuable financial asset in the long run is not money, it is options, the ability to choose. Discipline applied to your finances over time builds options, and options build freedom. And freedom, real freedom, not just the freedom to buy things, but the freedom to choose how you spend your days, to choose work you find meaningful,
to choose generosity over anxiety. That freedom is worth every sacrifice that discipline asks of you.
Let me also say something about the role of service in the discipline of success, because I think we sometimes get confused about what the marketplace rewards. The marketplace rewards value, period. Nothing else, consistently over time. Not appearance, not effort alone, not intention, value. The contribution you make to the people around you, to your employer, your clients, your customers, your colleagues. That is what the marketplace measures and compensates. And here is the discipline: to consistently ask, how can I become more valuable? Not how can I get more? Those are not the same question. The person who asks, how can I get more, is negotiating with the marketplace. The person who asks, how can I become more valuable, is investing in it. And the marketplace is generous to those who invest in it.
Work harder on yourself than you do on your job. I've said that in hundreds of rooms to thousands of people, and I say it again now because it is so consistently misapplied. Most people work hard on the job. They show up, they perform, they fulfill the requirement, but they do not work on themselves, on the underlying capability, the philosophy, the discipline, the knowledge, with anything like the same intensity. The job earns today's living. Working on yourself builds tomorrow's capacity, and tomorrow's capacity is the asset. The job can change, markets shift, industries evolve, but the person who has consistently worked on themselves, who is more capable this year than last, who has a richer philosophy, a broader knowledge base, a deeper discipline, that person is always employable, always valuable, always capable of creating what they need. Work harder on yourself than on anything else. Make that the primary investment, and watch what the marketplace returns to you over time.
Let me bring this full circle, because I began by talking about a 25-year-old man standing in an office in California, hearing the truth for the first time. And I want to end by talking about what that man became, not to celebrate him, but to offer evidence of what the disciplines can do. I have not always been the person speaking to you today. The person speaking to you today is the accumulated product of decades of daily disciplines, faithfully, though imperfectly, maintained. The reading, the reflection, the goal setting, and the goal reviewing, the consistent work on myself alongside the work on the craft, the careful attention to associations, the management of money with respect for the future, the responses to adversity that chose growth over bitterness. All of it, compounded, produced a life I could not have imagined sitting broke and embarrassed in that office in the late 1950s. Not because I was exceptional. I want to be clear about this. The disciplines I'm describing are not reserved for exceptional people. They are available to every person who will simply apply them consistently. The exceptional life is available to the ordinary person through the extraordinary power of consistent disciplines maintained over time. That is the whole secret. There isn't another one. I remember one of the last conversations I had with Mr. Schoaf before he passed away. He was ill by then and he knew it. And we sat together in the quiet of an afternoon and he said, "Jim, I want to ask you something." And I said, "Of course." And he said, "Do you have any regrets about the years since we met?" And I was quiet for a long time, thinking about it honestly. And I said, "Only that I didn't begin sooner." He smiled and he said, "That's everybody's answer. But the discipline you applied from the moment you decided, that I'm proud of. That's the work. That's the work. The daily, faithful, unremarkable, accumulating work of applying discipline to the life you intend to build." Whatever your version of beginning sooner looks like, whatever it is you should have started in your 20s or your 30s, or even last year, the answer to that regret is not to mourn it. The answer is to begin now, today, with the seeds you have, in the field you're standing in the season you're actually in. The bridge is there. The planks are available. The destination is not as far as the gap makes it appear. Discipline is the bridge between goals and accomplishment. Build it today. Now let me address something directly, because it comes up in every conversation I have about discipline, and I think avoiding it would make this incomplete. What about failure? Because here's the reality. If you commit to the disciplines, truly commit, not as an experiment, but as a way of life, you will still fail at things. You will set goals and miss them. You will start habits and break them. You will plant seeds and lose the harvest to circumstances outside your control. The disciplines are not a guarantee of perfect outcomes. The farm is not a guarantee of perfect harvests. Some years the weather is unkind. Some seasons the market turns. Some efforts produce less than they deserved. The question is not whether you will fail. The question is how you will meet the failure. I think the people who give up on discipline most often do so, not because they are lazy,
I said earlier, I don't believe most people are lazy, but because they are perfectionists in the wrong way. They have an all-or-nothing relationship with their own performance. They miss one day of reading and declare the habit broken. They miss 1 month of saving and conclude the plan is ruined. They fail at one business and conclude they're not someone who succeeds at business. And with each conclusion, they withdraw further from the engagement that might eventually produce something real. This is the discipline of resilience, and it might be the hardest discipline of all, because it requires you to distinguish between a stumble and a fall, between a breach in the discipline and the abandonment of it, between a bad season and the decision to stop farming. My father had bad years on the farm. I can remember at least 2 or 3 harvests from my childhood that were significantly below what he'd hoped for and planned for. And he was discouraged. He was human. He sat at the kitchen table in the evenings with a different quietness than his usual quietness, a heaviness to it. But he never once considered not planting the next year. The failure of one season was not evidence that farming didn't work. It was evidence that farming, like all meaningful pursuits, has seasons that test your commitment before they reward it. The discipline of resilience says, I will not demand that my path be straight. I will not require that my progress be constant. I will not use a difficult month as permission to abandon a worthy direction. I will learn what the failure has to teach. Every failure teaches something if you approach it as a student rather than a victim, and I will incorporate that learning into the next planting. Failure is not the opposite of discipline. Failure met with the discipline of resilience is part of the process. It is the winter before the spring. It is the information the soil provides about what you need to do differently. It is the honest feedback of a universe that rewards genuine adaptation and penalizes rigid repetition of what isn't working. What failure cannot be, if you intend to build something lasting, is an endpoint. Failure is a waypoint. It is information. It is a season, and then you plant again. I want to talk about one more thing before we close this conversation, and it is perhaps the most personal thing I'll say. I want to talk about the relationship between discipline and happiness, because there is a version of this message that can be heard as work hard, sacrifice pleasure, defer everything enjoyable to some future date when you finally earned the right to enjoy your life. And I want to be absolutely clear that is not what I mean. That is not what I've found to be true. And that approach, frankly, is a misapplication of the philosophy of discipline that leads to brittle, joyless lives. Here's what I found. Discipline, practiced well, increases happiness, not decreases it, not defers it, increases it, now, alongside the building of future reward. The person who reads every morning wakes up with a different energy than the person who starts the day scrolling. The person who has exercised consistently for a year feels different in their body than the person who hasn't moved in months. The person who has saved faithfully and has 3 months of expenses in reserve sleeps differently than the person who lives at the edge of their income. The person who has tended their relationships with care has richer holidays and more sustaining friendships and a deeper sense of home. Discipline builds the conditions for a better experience of life, not just the future life, the present one. The clarity that comes from daily reading, the energy that comes from caring for the body, the peace that comes from financial responsibility, the connection that comes from investing in relationships. These are not deferred pleasures. These are present ones. And beyond that, there is a specific joy that I have never found any other way to access. The joy of becoming. The satisfaction of looking back at 6 months or a year and seeing clearly that you are more capable than you were, that you know more, understand better, can do things you couldn't do before. The accumulating evidence that you are building something, building yourself, and that the building is working. That joy is available only to the person who has been doing the work. It cannot be consumed. It cannot be purchased. It cannot be shortcut. It can only be earned, plank by plank, on the bridge of discipline. That's the joy I wish for you. Not the joy of arrival at some distant destination, though that too is real and worth pursuing. The joy of the builder. The daily satisfaction of the person who can say, truthfully, I am becoming who I intend to become. That is the promise of the disciplined life. And it is, in my experience, fully kept. One last thought, and it comes from my father. Late in his life, he was well past 70 and the farming was behind him, and he spent his days more quietly. I sat with him on the porch of the house where I'd grown up, on an autumn evening when the air was sharp and the light was going gold. and I asked him something I've been wanting to ask for years. I said, "Dad, if you could go back, if you knew what you know now, what would you do differently?" And he was quiet for a long time, in the way he was quiet about things that mattered. And then he said, "Not much. I'd worry less. I'd sit on this porch more in the evenings, and I'd tell your mother more often that she was beautiful." He paused. "But the work, the getting up, the planting, the tending, the showing up no matter what the weather said, I wouldn't change any of that. That's what made a life worth living. The work, the faithfulness to the work, the faithfulness to the work. That is the whole thing. That is all of it. You don't have to be exceptional. You don't have to be lucky. You don't have to be born into the right circumstances or find yourself in the right moment or know the right people. You have to be faithful. Faithful to the daily disciplines. Faithful to the goals you wrote down. Faithful to the philosophy you chose. Faithful to the person you decided to become. Faithful every day, whether it's dramatic or not, whether anyone notices or not, whether the results are visible yet or not. 5 years from now, you will arrive. The only question is where. I believe you know, in your honest heart, where you want to be. I believe you know, in your honest heart, which disciplines would take you there. I believe you know more than you need to know to begin. Begin today. Stay faithful. And one day, sooner than fear promises, later than impatience demands, you will look back from wherever you've arrived and trace the path. And what you will see is not magic, not luck, not the exceptional gift of a fortunate few. You will see the bridge, plank by plank, discipline by discipline, day by day, built by you. I want to return to something I said earlier that I think deserves much more time and consideration. The matter of your philosophy. Because I've come to believe, after all the years and all the conversations and all the study, that this is the master key. This is the thing underneath all the things. And if I haven't said enough about it yet, I haven't done my job. Your philosophy is your operating system for life. It is the set of beliefs, assumptions, and convictions, mostly unexamined, mostly inherited, mostly invisible to you, that determine how you interpret every experience, every challenge, every opportunity that comes your way. It determines whether you see a difficulty as a problem to solve or evidence that success isn't for you. It determines whether you see wealth in the hands of another person as something inspiring or something suspicious. It determines whether you believe, fundamentally, that your life is something you are creating or something that is happening to you. Most people's philosophy was handed to them. It arrived through the mouths of the adults who raised them, through the neighborhood they grew up in, which carried its own invisible philosophy about what people like us do or don't do, achieve or don't achieve, through the stories they heard and the stories they didn't hear, through the culture and the decade and the social position they were born into. And most people have never stopped to examine that philosophy. They've never held it up to the light and asked, is this true? Is this serving me? Does this philosophy, if I apply it consistently, lead to the life I want to build? Or is it a philosophy of limitation, dressed up in reasonable language, that has been keeping me exactly where I am? Let me ask you something. Do you believe that your income is fixed by forces outside your control? Do you believe that your current circumstances are a reliable predictor of your future circumstances? Do you believe that discipline is admirable in others, but somehow not quite available to you, for specific reasons you could articulate if pressed? Do you believe that the people who have built things you admire had some advantage that you don't have? Those beliefs, if you hold them, are your philosophy at work. And they are not true in any absolute sense. They are interpretations. They are habits of mind. And like all habits, they can be changed. Not overnight, not through one revelation, but through the sustained daily practice of feeding your mind something different, of exposing yourself with discipline to a philosophy that says your life is yours to build, your results are yours to create, your future is written by the disciplines you apply today. This is why the reading matters so much. Not just for the information it contains, but for the philosophy it gradually installs. Every book you read by someone who built something real from modest beginnings is a transmission of their philosophy. Every autobiography of someone who faced failure and rose from it is an expansion of your concept of what is possible. Every work of wisdom literature, from Seneca to Carnegie to James to Frankl, is an invitation to adopt a more empowering set of assumptions about yourself and your capacity. Read enough of the right books, and your philosophy changes. And when your philosophy changes, your approach changes. And when your approach changes, your results change. Not immediately, but inevitably. The
The sequence is as reliable as the seasons. Now, there's one more aspect of the philosophy of discipline that I want to address, and it's this: the relationship between discipline and deserving. Here's what I mean. Many people I've spoken with over the years have buried somewhere below the surface of their stated ambitions a quiet belief that they don't really deserve the life they're working toward. Not in a dramatic, self-pitying way, just a quiet sense that success is for other people, for people with better educations, better connections, better starting points. And this belief, this particular strand of philosophy, functions like a slow leak in a tire. You keep putting in air, you keep doing the work, and you keep losing ground, unable to figure out why the progress never quite holds. The discipline of philosophy applied to this is to ask, on what basis do I conclude I don't deserve it? What is the actual evidence for that belief? Is it a conclusion arrived at through honest analysis, or is it a story I absorbed without examination? And if it's a story, and in most cases it is, what story would serve me better?
The person who builds the best life is not the person who deserves it in some cosmic sense. It is the person who decides to build it and applies the disciplines faithfully. Deserving has nothing to do with it. The harvest doesn't measure whether the farmer deserved a good yield. It measures what was planted and how it was tended. That's all. That's the whole accounting. You deserve what you build, and you can build more than you've built. And the bridge between where you are and what you deserve to build is discipline. I want to spend a few final minutes on the topic of momentum, because I think it's often overlooked in the conversation about discipline, and I've found it to be critically important. Momentum is real. It is a physical and psychological force, and it applies to the disciplines of life as surely as it applies to any rolling object. The hardest part of any disciplined practice is beginning. The resistance is highest at the start. Inertia is the force that keeps things at rest, and overcoming inertia requires the most energy. But once the practice is in motion, once you've been reading every morning for 30 days, once you've been exercising 3 times a week for 2 months, once you've been setting aside the first portion of your income consistently enough that it feels like the natural order of things, momentum is working for you rather than against you. The resistance drops. The discipline that once required enormous willpower begins to require almost none, because it has become part of who you are rather than something you're working to become. This is why beginning matters so much. This is why I keep returning to the urgency of today over tomorrow. Because every day you defer the beginning of a discipline is another day you spend working against momentum rather than with it. And the accumulation of those deferred days is the accumulation of lost momentum, which means each subsequent beginning requires overcoming inertia all over again. Begin today. Not because the conditions are perfect, not because you're fully ready, because every day you wait, you're paying the full cost of inertia for no return. And once you begin, protect the momentum. Understand that a discipline broken is not just one day's loss. It is an invitation for inertia to return. Miss one day intentionally, and the second miss is easier to justify. Miss 2 days, and you're no longer maintaining a discipline. You're deciding whether to have one. The most important days in any discipline are not the exciting launch days or the days when momentum is carrying you forward effortlessly. The most important days are the days when it would be reasonable to take a day off. The days when you are tired or busy or traveling, or when the weather is bad, or when nothing visible depends on whether you do the thing or not. Those are the days that determine whether you have a discipline or whether you have a memory of once having tried one. Do the thing on the hard day. That's the discipline. That's the plank on the bridge. That's the seed in the autumn cold ground that the spring will vindicate. My father put it simply, as he put everything simply. He said, you do the work on the bad days because the field doesn't know it's a bad day. The field doesn't know you're tired. The field doesn't know you had a difficult week. The field doesn't negotiate around your schedule. It simply responds to what was done and what wasn't done. And so does life. Do the work on the bad days. That's the whole philosophy, expressed in a sentence. And if you do, if you maintain the disciplines on the bad days as well as the good ones, through the difficult seasons as well as the easy ones, in the winter of invisibility as well as the fall of reward, then you will build something real, something yours, something that no external circumstance can fully take away, because it is not a possession. It is a capacity, a character, a set of skills and habits and philosophical convictions that go with you wherever you go, that generate value in whatever context you're placed in, that make you the kind of person who creates results
rather than waits for them. That is what the disciplines build. Not just the money, not just the health, not just the external markers of a successful life, though those come too in their season. They build the person, and the person, fully built, the person who has committed to the daily disciplines and maintained them faithfully over years, that person carries within them everything they need to build whatever they need to build next. That is the ultimate promise of discipline, not a specific outcome, the capacity to create outcomes, the internal infrastructure to meet whatever life brings and to respond to it productively, creatively, with faith and with forward motion. 5 years from now, you will arrive. And when you get there, I want you to know, I want you to feel, with the certainty that only the consistent disciplines can provide, that you chose where you went, that you set the sail, that the wind was what it was, but you were at the helm. That is the life available to you through the daily disciplines. It is the only path I know to it. It is the path my mentor showed me in a small office when I was broke and 25 and still willing to hear the truth. It is the path my father walked in the fields of Idaho every morning of his working life. It is the path I have walked, imperfectly but persistently, for more than half a century. And it leads somewhere remarkable, every time. For every person willing to walk it. The bridge is built one plank at a time. Start today. There is one more conversation I want to have before we close, and it's about the long game, the very long game. I've spoken about 5-year thinking, and that's important, but I want to spend some time on the 20-year and the 30-year frame, because I think in our impatient culture, we've lost sight of what is possible when the disciplines compound over decades rather than years. Consider the mathematics of consistent effort. A person who reads 30 minutes a day, every day, for 30 years will have read somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 hours of focused material. In 30 years, working at that pace, they will have consumed the equivalent of several advanced university educations, in whatever subjects they chose, directed by whatever problems they were trying to solve, and whatever lives they were trying to build. That is a profound accumulation. That is a mind shaped by decades of intentional investment. A person who sets aside 20% of their income consistently over 30 working years and invests it simply and patiently will, by any reasonable calculation, have built a financial position that most of their peers will find difficult to explain. Not because they were lucky, not because they had extraordinary income, because compound interest is patient in a way that human beings are not, and it rewards the person who is patient enough to let it work. A person who tends their most important relationships with consistent care over 3 decades will have, at 60 or 65, a richness of human connection that money cannot manufacture. Deep friendships, a marriage or partnership that has been through difficulty and emerged stronger. Children who call not just on holidays, but because they actually want to talk. Professional relationships built on years of mutual generosity that have become, over time, genuine trust. These outcomes, these magnificent, tangible, real outcomes, are not the product of talent or fortune or the rare exceptional circumstance. They are the product of the ordinary person who made an ordinary commitment to the extraordinary power of daily discipline and then kept that commitment for a very long time. I want to paint you a picture of that person. Not an abstract picture, a specific one. She's 63 years old. She grew up in modest circumstances, with parents who worked hard but never accumulated much. She went to a reasonable school, got a reasonable job, and by her late 20s was beginning to feel that she might simply repeat the pattern, working hard, getting by, hoping for improvement. Then something shifted. Maybe it was a book. Maybe it was a conversation. Maybe it was the moment she looked at herself honestly and decided she was done hoping and ready to begin doing. She started reading 30 minutes every morning before the day began. She started saving, not a large amount at first, but faithfully, every paycheck. She started being more intentional about her time, protecting a few hours each week for the work that mattered most for her development, rather than letting the urgent consume the important. She started choosing her associations with more care, seeking out people who were building something and spending more of her hours with them. She was not dramatic about any of this. She didn't announce it. She didn't transform overnight. She just began, quietly and consistently, to apply the daily disciplines. And now, at 63, here is what those 35 years of disciplined practice produced. She has a mind that is genuinely rich, broad, curious, capable of making connections that others miss, comfortable with ideas in domains well beyond her formal training. She has a financial position that is genuinely secure. Not wealthy by headline standards,
but free in the truest sense from the anxiety that financial precariousness creates. She has relationships that are genuinely sustaining, people who have known her through her best and worst years and who remain through care that was consistently given, present, and precious. She does not explain this as luck. She does not attribute it to exceptional gifts. She traces it clearly and specifically to the morning she decided to begin and the thousands of mornings after that when she decided to continue. That is available to you. That story, in your version, with your specific gifts and circumstances and goals, is available to you. Not because I'm offering you something magic, because the disciplines are always available to everyone, without exception, at any age, in any circumstance. They are available today. Now, I know that this is a long conversation and I've covered a great deal of ground, so let me try to distill it, not to simplify what isn't simple, but to name clearly and specifically the disciplines I'm asking you to consider. The discipline of the mind. Read every day. Read with purpose and direction. Feed the garden of your mind with intention every single day, without exception. The discipline of time. Own your first hour. Plan each day with enough intentionality that you can look back on it and honestly say you moved toward the life you want. Protect the high-value hours for the high-value work. The discipline of health. Treat the body as the instrument it is. Sleep with respect for what sleep provides. Move consistently. Eat with the awareness that what you put in determines what comes out. The discipline of finances. Spend less than you earn. Save and invest the difference faithfully. Build over time sources of value beyond your primary labor. Treat your financial future with the same seriousness you'd treat a garden you intend to live in for the rest of your life. The discipline of relationships. Show up fully for the people who matter. Lead with generosity in professional relationships. Choose your associations with wisdom and intention. Invest in the people in your circle before the relationship needs repair, not after. The discipline of response. Meet adversity as the farmer meets bad weather, with preparation, with learning, with the discipline to ask, "What do I do next?" rather than, "Why did this happen to me?" Set the sail, regardless of how the wind blows. The discipline of goals. Write them down. Review them regularly. Let them guide the direction of every other discipline. Know where you're going clearly enough that each day's work feels purposeful rather than random. 7 disciplines, practiced daily, compounded over years. These are the planks of the bridge. Every one of them is available to you. None of them requires exceptional gifts. All of them require the one thing that is always and entirely in your power to give, your faithful daily commitment. The bridge between your goals and your accomplishment is made of these planks. The bridge has always been there. The only question, the only one that matters, is whether you're building it. 5 years from now, you will arrive. The seasons will have passed. The seeds will have grown or not grown. The disciplines will have compounded or not compounded. Your life will be the sum of your daily choices, not your intentions, your choices. Choose today. Choose tomorrow. Choose every day after that with the full awareness that each choice is a plank on a bridge, and the bridge leads somewhere real, and the somewhere real is worth every ordinary, unglamorous, faithful day it takes to reach it. My father said good work today at the edge of his field at dusk. I say it to you now, at the edge of this conversation. Good work. Begin, and come back tomorrow and do it again. And in the years after today, the months and seasons that will accumulate into years without asking your permission, let me tell you what I hope for you, not what I guarantee, because I've been honest enough in this conversation to not offer guarantees, but what I hope, based on what I've seen the disciplines produce in every person who committed to them genuinely. I hope that you will look back in 12 months and find that you are measurably more capable than you are today. Not dramatically, measurably. That the reading has populated your mind with new frameworks, that the financial discipline has produced a small but real cushion of security, that the physical investment has given you an energy you'd forgotten was available to you, that the intentional relationship investment has deepened something that was thinning, that the morning practice has produced a clarity and purposefulness that used to feel out of reach. Small changes, measurable ones, compounding. I hope that in 3 years you will look back at today's version of yourself with the gentle recognition that a great deal has changed, not in the dramatic way of before and after stories, but in the quiet, deep way that real growth works. The way a tree is different in year 3 than year 1. Not a different tree. The same tree, deeper rooted, broader branched, more resilient in the wind, more capable of sheltering what lives beneath it. That is what 3 years of consistent daily disciplines produces. A deeper root, a broader branch, more resilience, more capacity. And I hope that in 10 years, you will have built something. Not necessarily a business, though perhaps that. Not necessarily a fortune, though with the financial disciplines that becomes possible. But something. Something that represents the investment of your daily choices into a form that you can point to and say, I built this. Not life built this for me. Not luck produced this. I built this, plank by plank, with the daily disciplines that I chose to apply and continued to apply when it was hard and when nothing was visible and when the result was still years away. That is the extraordinary life. Not the life of headlines and dramatic moments and sudden reversals of fortune. The extraordinary life is the ordinary life, faithfully lived, consistently disciplined, continually building. My father's farm was not remarkable by any objective measure. It was not the largest farm in Idaho. It was not the most prosperous. It was a modest thing, built by modest means, maintained by consistent, faithful work across a lifetime. But it was his. Every plank of the fence was placed by his hand. Every acre of soil carried the impression of his work. Every harvest was the direct result of a season of disciplined planting and tending. And when he stood at the edge of that field at dusk, there was a satisfaction in his face that I have never seen matched by the expressions of people who were handed things. The satisfaction of the builder, the joy of the farmer at harvest, the deep, earned, unassailable sense of a life that was constructed, not simply received. That is what I want for you. That is what the disciplines build. Begin today. Tend faithfully. Trust the seasons. And one day, sooner than fear tells you, at exactly the right moment, you will stand at the edge of your field, in whatever form that field takes in your particular life, and you will understand what my father understood. Good work. It was good work, and it was worth it. Every day of it.